If you're not familiar with our services, we are a bookkeeping, payroll, and consulting firm for the restaurant industry. It's something that our firm is passionate about. And my name is Chris Maxey, and I'm the CEO of the company. As a notice, this is not legal or tax advice, and anything that we provide, any advice that we provide to you today, should not be relied on for tax, legal, or accounting advice. We do have some additional webinars coming up. The next one is going to be costing a menu. With inflation changing all the time and continuing to change for years to come. Costing a menu is becoming more and more important than it ever has been before. We'll be sending out this slide deck after the fact, so if you are interested in registering for that webinar, you can register right from our website, and you can also sign up for any of our newsletters that we have, and we'll let you know anytime that we have a new webinar scheduled for the coming year. Any of these webinars that we host are uploaded to YouTube later in the week. So if you miss it or aren't able to attend the full webinar, you'll be able to watch it on YouTube later on, and we will send that link out later this week. So looking at labor cost as a focus, we've done a couple of different topics that are much more of a macro look at what to do during the off season. In this webinar, we're really going to be focusing only on labor cost, obviously, and a couple of different ways that you can mitigate labor costs through the winter months. The fact of the matter is that most restaurants aren't going to be able to cut their payroll enough to be able to hit their ideal target. So there are some tricks that you can do to try to get that labor cost to being as close to ideal as possible while still maintaining a sustainable business. There's essentially three different levers that we can pull here. One of them is to cut cost and meaning labor. Another is to increase revenues, and then the last is to increase efficiency. So what is a good labor cost? Really, that number depends on what the concept is. Generally speaking, what we're looking for overall is a prime cost, which is basically your labor and your inputs, cost of goods sold, food purchases, beverage purchases, that is about 55%. And because we're looking at that number in total is 55%, the labor portion of that total shifts based off of the concept. And if you have a concept that has higher product costs, so in this case, we say a steakhouse, we have to have lower labor costs to offset it. That is why in most cases, whenever you go to a steakhouse, there's not a lot of fabrication that needs to be done in terms of like that menu, like you're portioning steaks, that's really about it. And in the grand scheme of things, if you're looking at other concepts, like it's pretty straightforward. So labor cost is a lot lower, 25%. For fine dining, full service, that number is higher. The amount of servers that you have and the amount of work that is put into putting that menu together is much more involved. And so that is on the higher end of the spectrum at 30 to 32%. Fast casual, quick service restaurants also don't have much in terms of front of house. So that number is also on the lower end of the spectrum at 25%, though that number does get even lower than that, depending on if it's like truly counter service or you're stepping in there isn't really anything at all. That number can get all the way down to 20%, but that's not really the norm in this modern day and age. The other thing that is worth considering here is that with inflation and increasing wage costs, these numbers are getting harder and harder to achieve. And it may be over the long term that there is not going to be, that these numbers are going to increase a couple of points on average, just because you can't hit these numbers anymore. It used to be that that they would say that these margins are the law of 30s, where you have 30% food cost, 30% labor cost, and 30% of everything else. Truth be told, that law doesn't really work anymore. It's not a sustainable model, and that's why we're looking more at prime cost at 55%. In order to calculate labor cost, you're going to be looking at a couple of different numbers. The first thing is going to be gross wages, and your gross wages are wages before taxes, and it doesn't include tips. So that's just the base hourly rate or salary rate that somebody makes before you include anything like payroll taxes, FICA, or any sort of tips or gratuity at all. Because really, gratuity, it comes in, it goes out. It's much like sales tax, where it's not really your money. It's something we just take out of this in entirety, because on the revenue side, we also don't include tips in that number either. So for gross wages, no taxes, no tips. For net sales, you'll see we use net sales here. We're not including tips, taxes, or any sort of fees in that sales number. We just want to know what money came in that is money, our money, and not someone else's money, which tips and taxes are both both other people's money in this case. So we take the gross wages, divide it by the total revenue, and that gives us a decimal point number, 0.4 in this case, which essentially, if you go back to high school math, that ends up being 40%. In this case, with their labor cost being 40%, their number is too high. So they have to look at lowering their labor cost here. Another thing worth noting is that you can look at this on a weekly basis, or you can look at this on a monthly basis. If you look at it on a monthly basis, you have to consider that there are 4.3 weeks in a month, and there are 3 months of the year that have 5 payrolls. Those months that you have 5 payrolls, you are not going to be hitting your labor cost unless it happens to be in the high season. So now that we kind of know what our baseline labor cost is, the first step is to look at cutting cost. You essentially have 2 different options. One of them is to cut costs or cut hours. The other is to cut rates. One of these options is much better than the other. You can cut hours, which a lot of folks in the industry are used to. Off season, employees may be working 50 hours, and in the off season that may come down to 35 or 30 hours in order to hit that target. So most employees are used to it. The thing with cutting hours is to try not to do it abruptly, because if it's reactionary, it may startle employees, and they might think that there's some deeper issue going on rather than you just trying to modify your labor cost through the winter months. The other option is to cut wages. And as you can see from the notes here, not a huge fan of this option. There's a lot of labor laws surrounding this. There's a lot of issues that you could have if you cut somebody's hourly rate or their salary. You know, if they are upset by this, which anybody would be upset by having their wage cut, a lot of times they may ask a lawyer, and so you could find yourself paying a lot more money fighting with an employee's lawyer about, you know, retaliation or anything like that. So most of the time, it's not really an option, though it is there. And if you do ever decide to go down this route, you should definitely be talking with a labor attorney or an HR professional. So much so that I've listed this 3 times. The final thing of note here is that if you are going to be cutting wages, the best way to do it is to do it through attrition. And what I mean by attrition is every time somebody leaves the company and you're looking to hire a new person, hire that person at a lower rate. That way you're not cutting anybody's wages. It happens. There is the restaurant industry is a transient folk, and so you often have people coming and going, and so just bringing them in at a lower rate to start with is usually the best way to do this, to deal with this concept in general. You also can offset, the lower intro rate with some benefits and things like that to make the position more attractive. There are a lot of low-cost options out there, like 401k, PTO, things like that, that have never really been the norm for the restaurant industry, but are quickly becoming the norm through 2022 and COVID. A couple of pros and cons with this side of labor control, cost control. One of them is it's the easiest way to fix labor cost. Just adjusting people's hours is going to have an immediate effect. And if you're really kind of running low on cash and it's really starting to become quite stressful, this is the fastest way to do it. It's also the least risky from a financial standpoint. It is easy for you to cut cost. It is hard for you to increase revenue. That is a much more difficult and much more gray area to try to increase revenue, and there's a lot more risk involved in doing it. It's also fast. You see immediate results 1 week later after you've made your labor cuts. You really shouldn't be doing it all at one time, but if push comes to shove and you need to do it all at one time, it's the fastest way to see a result. On the con side of this, you risk losing some or all of your talent. There is always the risk that if you are reducing everybody's hours, that they say no, and then you risk having a walkout, especially if it's abrupt. You also have, you may have some issues with reputation among your local industry, where if you're doing a large amount of cuts all at once, that people talk, and so the last thing you want to do is gain a reputation for being a bit of a cutthroat and cutting labor all at once. So with this, it's always best to do labor cuts as a gradual approach, not something that is just a knee-jerk reaction. Cutting wages is an HR nightmare, and I can't stress this enough, that really is not, that is a last resort for you to be doing that. You also risk losing key employees. They may be promised more hours at a different restaurant, and they may leave you for that. And if it is abrupt, it does risk demoralizing your staff as a whole, which is not something that you really want to face. The best way to deal with scheduling and dealing with labor cuts is to look at it from a forecasting perspective. When you're looking at your restaurant, you have if you've been open for a while now, you have an idea of what amount of business that you're going to do. So realistically, what you want is to look at what you did last year and what you did last week, and make some comparisons based off of that. So you have essentially some baseline understanding of where your current trajectory is for what your sales numbers are, looking at what you did last year. So assuming that there's no holiday or there was no massive event that affected your business, like weather or something like that, you can look at what you did last year and then look at what you did last week and look at what you did last week, last year, and see basically, okay, well, I did $15,000 last year. Last week, I did about $12,000. Last year, I did about $15,000. Okay, so I'm actually down from last year. And so it's probably more reasonable for me to say that this week we'll probably do closer to 12,000 than 15,000. Once you have that number, take it and then multiply it by what you want your ideal labor cost to be. So your ideal labor cost would be 0.3 in this case, and that would give you what your wage budget is. So in this case, $4,500. When you have that wage budget, you then factor in what your management salaries are, which are basically the ones that your salaries are that you can't control. That number is set. And then what you're left with in terms of wages is what your hourly budget would be. Now, if you're looking at this and you're saying that number is just way too low, it's entirely possible in the off season that number is way too low and that you're not able to actually function based off of that. So there's only so much trimming you can do on your wages without really starting to run into a lot of issues in terms of being able to be open and having adequate staff to be able to operate the restaurant. And so for many businesses that in the off season, their ideal labor cost may be 30%, but in the winter months, it may be that their minimum viable wages are higher than that. So they may have a labor cost the winter months that are 40%. And if you're looking at that and you have that issue, then you're going to have two different ideal labor costs. You're going to have a higher labor cost in the winter, that might be 40%, and then have a lower labor cost in the summer, which might be closer to 20%, and hope that by the end of the year, those two ideal targets average out to the target that you want of 30%. So if you are in a hyper seasonal area, consider having two labor cost ideals and having them set seasonally. The next thing to consider with this is that that's a lot of math, and that's a lot of work to do that every single week. And it's also hard to figure out what that hourly amount is. There are a lot of options that are out there that will help you with scheduling so that you can actually have have that number and it can pull that information for you so that you can double check it, but you're not actually doing all this math in Excel and trying to figure this out. And also, if you are putting out your schedule on a piece of paper that you're hanging up on the wall, it may be time to modernize. And there's a lot of people out there that don't want to drive to work or wait for their next shift to be able to figure out what their next week's schedule is. So from an employee convenience factor, utilizing one of these three softwares is going to be hugely advantageous to you because you can distribute the schedule out to folks via email and text rather than a piece of paper hung up in the office. Any of these three options, you can also just hang up a piece of paper in the office and also send it out via email for folks that may not have email or a phone, which is, it's popular. But what these softwares do and why they're so useful and powerful is they pull in your sales data. So you know what the sales data is, and you can see it over time in the platform. You can also pull in your scheduling data and come up with a budgeted schedule amount so that you can see exactly how much money on the schedule or how much in wages you have on the schedule before publishing it and know exactly how much that is. And then these softwares also look at what the actual time is, so that you can look at what your schedule was and what your actual was and see where the variances are. If you're constantly having trouble with the fact that you have scheduled an employee for you have hit your scheduled number constantly and you're still not hitting that actual number when you're running payroll, this will help you research what that issue is. You may have somebody that you know, comes in 15 minutes early, leaves 15 minutes to a half an hour late every single week, and that's, you know, 45 minutes a day. They have a 5-day schedule. That number adds up. That's, you know, close to 4 hours a week that is added onto your actual payroll that you did not have scheduled. And while, you know, that is a great thing to have somebody that wants to work, there is a time and a place for that. And through the winter, there is not really, you don't have that option available to you. And so these scheduling versus time tracking apps will help you isolate those issues. They don't have to switch over their time punches from their point of sale either. So if you have Toast or Upserve or Square or any of these other options that are out there, both 7shifts and Homebase are agnostic to this, and they pull those that time punch data from the point of sale. So they don't need to switch over to 7shifts or anything like that. They'll get their schedule from it, but they'll also just be able to continue to punch in via their normal process. It just helps you because it brings your sales data, your wage data, and your schedule data and puts it all into one place so that you can see where you went wrong. And that's really powerful. So now that we've looked at what strategies we can do to cut costs and monitor that cost, the next option really is to look at increasing revenue. And you're probably looking at me and saying, okay, obviously increasing revenue in the winter is what we want to do, but that's not really possible if there's not people. And you are correct. What you're faced with is looking at increasing revenue in a little bit more ambiguous ways. And when you're in the summer months, you may be open 4 or 5 days a week. The 7-day model is largely gone by the wayside, but you may be open 5 days a week. In the winter, it may not be possible for you to be open really 5 days a week. You may go down to 4 days a week just because it's more efficient to ditch that 5th day. But you also can look at adding nights that are incredibly low cost. And that is looking at adding days that are perhaps counter service or chef's table or something like that, where you don't need to necessarily have a front of house, or the menu is incredibly simple and slim so that you don't necessarily have to have a huge back of house either. And it's a limited number of seats. So you're not really open in like, if your restaurant is 60 seats, you may just open the bar and not have any seating available for that night. And then that one bartender perhaps can serve that entire group. And then there might be 1 or 2 people in the kitchen, usually and hopefully salaried positions, that are serving a really easy menu. Dim sum, pizza, ramen, sushi, things that don't require huge amounts of staff in order to be able to do that service, but are very slim skeleton crews that you can do it. And you may, if you have your front of house manager or your general manager in the front and a chef or sous chef in the back, it's salaried wages. It's no additional wage cost for you to do that, but you may be able to bring in an extra $2,000 or $3,000 of revenue that would not have been there before and would have been a loss if you had just been open on a Wednesday. So that may be the option. Rather than going from 5 days to 4 days, you go to 4 days with one special menu or something like that. That is a much more efficient day. The other option is also kind of a mixture here, which is to add a kitchen service fee. There are some restaurants that, rather than trying to pool the entire staff into one pool, which is illegal, or is deeply frowned upon, depending on which attorney you ask, presents a huge liability to you. So a lot of folks are scrapping the living wage fee, are scrapping pooled tips with the back of house entirely, and then putting a more moderate fee on for a kitchen fee that goes to the back of house exclusively. So you have two separate pools, but essentially what that does is it allows you to come in at a lower hiring rate, and then also allows you to have more flexibility with seasonality. In the summer, they make more. In the winter, they make less. I know myself, as a former chef, it was certainly nice to have the stable salary through the winter months, but when it was the busy season, getting absolutely destroyed at the same amount of money for a service as I did in the winter did not feel great. So it would be incredibly popular for your back of house. And because it's such a small amount, a small percentage, it's not one of those things where you frequently, like if you ever are watching like TikTok or Instagram reels of like people asking about what these fees are and flipping out about the fees, like the living wage fees. Because it's such a small amount, it is a much more digestible fee for guests to swallow. With that being said, make sure that you are clear about this when guests sit down, and that they're not surprised by it at the end of the experience. Make sure it's on your website, make sure it's on social media, make sure it's on the menu, make sure that the host mentions it as they're seating guests, so that it's not a surprise. Because really, at the end of the day, the thing that upsets guests the most is when all of a sudden they find a fee that they were not prepared for before. That's usually the problem that they have most of the time, is that they're surprised by it. Eliminate the surprise, and they can choose whether or not they want to dine there based off of that. And they're not going to leave a negative review based on it, because they sat down knowing it, and they have a much harder time saying that they didn't know it if it's plastered everywhere. With this as well, you want to double check with an HR professional about this and how to implement this properly. And you want to make sure that there is a clear policy in your handbook with acknowledgements to make sure that everybody understands how this works. Because you want to be blatantly clear on all of these. Anytime that you're adding fees that are being collected and distributed to employees, you want to be very careful in your language and your communication with staff on what this is. Because if you use the wrong language for it, then it creates an issue. The final thing is to increase prices. If your labor cost is high, if your food cost is high, if it was high through the summer months, or the high season, wherever you might be, and now you're heading into the off season, it's likely you needed to increase prices all along. So no amount of cutting here is going to help you and hit your target if you're priced wrong. So make sure that you're reevaluating your pricing, looking at your competition, seeing what you can get, and making sure that your blended food cost is right. Because if your food cost is wrong, as well as your labor cost, it's likely that you have a menu pricing issue, not necessarily a labor issue. The last thing that we're looking at here is increasing efficiency. So one of the things that we've already touched on is looking at adding that fourth or fifth night, that is the alternative menu option. That is something that is efficient, where it's both low cost, higher revenue. It's a win-win. And so these are usually the best options that you can choose from at first. But it usually requires you to also deal with either labor cost reductions or wage revenue increases. You have to pick from a few of these options first and kind of test to see what works best for you. So in terms of increasing efficiency, one of the first things to look at is reducing service days or hours of operation. What may work out wonderfully for you in the high season is probably not going to work out well for you in the off season. And historically, if you were a restaurateur over the last decade or 2 decades, one of the oldest adages is just never to change your hours, because it upsets guests. They expect you to be open, and so you need to be open for those, regardless of whether business is good or not. That adage has gone out the window many years ago at this point. Nowadays, folks are much more, there's a lot more goodwill as towards restaurants changing their hours and changing their hours seasonally within reason. The more, like, if you're changing your hours 4 times a year, that's going to start to annoy guests. If you're changing it semi-annually, that is a normal expectation that people have these days. And so if you do a solid late night business in the high season and you don't in the low season, then you need to look at reducing your hours. For a lot of folks, depending on where they are, like if you're in the city, opening at 5 o'clock, there's no reason to, because nobody is going out until 6 or 7. So getting rid of those hours that are just not generating revenue is a very easy thing to do. You may run your hours 6 to 9 in the off season, whereas normally you would be 5 to 10 or 5 to 11 in the summer. And then the other thing to look at is whether or not, if you're on a 5-day operation, you know, the slower days, are those days really worth being open? Additionally, another consideration here is, what is the competition doing? Especially if you're in a small town or you're in a rural environment where there's not necessarily a lot of competition, it's very important for you to look and see what everybody else is doing. Because if you're all open from Wednesday till Sunday, you're basically leaving a blue ocean on Monday and Tuesday. There's no competition on Monday and Tuesday. So if there isn't anything open on Monday and Tuesday, scrap Wednesday or Thursday and go for Monday and Tuesday. You'll be the only game in town. So both looking to reduce hours, reduce days, or change the days to an area that is less competitive are 3 options that you very easily can do through some light changes. Ticketed events are also a good idea. If you're looking to do like 1 or 2 ticketed events per month or once a month, it's a great way of being able to pre-book an event, have some additional revenue, have it on a day that you're not open or during hours that you're not opened, and you can easily plan for it because you know exactly how many people are coming. So it's easy to schedule labor for a ticketed event because you know exactly how much you can deal with. It also generates more revenue that you would not have normally generated. The thing you want to avoid with this is cannibalizing existing business. So, if you are doing like a wine tasting or something along those lines, if you're doing it on a Saturday night, that's not really helping you. Honestly, it's probably hurting you because you may have done more otherwise. But if you're doing a wine tasting that's on a Thursday or a Sunday night or Sunday during the day, something along those lines, that's generating additional revenue for you, and it's not cannibalizing the business that you're already doing. This is a little bit larger of a shift, but changing your service style through different seasons. Full service is expensive, and especially if you're full service fine dining, there's a lot of front of house labor that's associated with that, and a lot of labor in a lot of different areas that is associated with it. So if you look at perhaps changing service styles on certain nights or in certain areas, that can help to reduce labor costs a lot, because if you're doing counter service, if you have the appropriate setup to be able to do counter service, that may be the way that you want to go with it. It is a big shift, and it may require an actual investment to do it. So if that is something that is a consideration for you, what you may want to end up doing is look at planning for the next low season, having this in place so that you can make that service change. Because if you currently are a seated restaurant with that is doing full service, it may not make sense to guess if you don't have like the appropriate counter signage, like marketing done to make this shift. Finally, one of the easiest ones to do and the highest reward is takeout and delivery. For takeout and carry out explicitly, there's no front of house wages that are associated with it. It scales nicely, and the only thing that you have to scale is your back of house, and the amount of volume that your back of house can do is much more conducive to takeout, especially if you can weave it into your normal business easily. The consideration with takeout, as always, is like making sure that you have a menu that can deal with large surges, and a menu that takes out well, and making sure that you have the appropriate supplies for it. No one likes it when you put fries in a wax box and then seal it closed so that they get home and then they have soggy fries. It's obvious. We all know this at this point. But making a consideration towards takeout and delivery, putting a focus on it, particularly in the winter months, and having a menu that is based around what that takeout business can do is going to be a huge benefit. You don't want to have an additional menu that is different from the menu that you're serving in the restaurant. You want to be serving both items in the restaurant. It may be that you reduce what you are offering in the restaurant to a more limited option for takeout business, because like ceviche is not really a great option for takeout. But then taking that and marketing it and continuing to pound that on social media that you have takeout and driving everybody to your online ordering is going to have a profound effect. And it's the lowest hanging fruit that you have. If you're in a rural market, there is not a lot of, your competition probably does not have a great setup for takeout. They're probably still asking people to call in their orders. If you're doing takeout, you need to have a point of sale that can accommodate for online ordering, because millennials and Gen Z do not want to call in an order. They are not going to call in an order. It is not something that we want to do. We are a folk that do not want to talk to people over the phone. It is like pulling out our nails. It's just not a viable option. So making sure that you have a point of sale that allows for frictionless online ordering, that they can just show up and pick it up, is what you want to have. Toast, Square being the absolute best one. Toast is also a great option. Upserve is also okay. They're not great at online ordering. But making sure that you have a system that a point of sale system that can take care of online ordering, that doesn't rely on a third party, that makes the process very easy for them is huge. If you are considering doing delivery like DoorDash, Grubhub, anything like that, this is a much deeper conversation. And you have to have a lot more consideration before dealing with any of those companies because of the fees that are associated with them. And it is a whole different ballgame. So being able to do online ordering via your point of sale, that is something that you control and does not involve paying fees to a third party, is the way that you want to proceed with this. When looking at what you're doing for future months, thing to remember with this is not to do all of these things. Pick and choose which things work best for your concept, and then test them out. You do not have to implement them all and then have to stick with it. Test the waters. The off season is a good time to do it. Pick a couple of options, test them out, do one-time onlys, see which works best, and then go ahead and implement it as part of your normal business practices. And the other thing with this is that try to do these things in the winter. A lot of these changes, particularly like if you're doing that special menu night, people end up looking forward to it. So if you do it all year long, it kind of ruins the allure of it, because they can always get it. But if you're doing it something that is through the winter months, it's something for the locals to look forward to. It's something that is different. And you can build it into something where it's a solid night of business for you. So try to make something special for the winter months, so that it doesn't seem like you're just kind of closing up shop as much as humanly possible, but trying to do some things that are a little bit different to drum up business. So key takeaways for today's webinar. The first being forecast when you're scheduling. Always look at your sales number and then schedule based off of what that sales number is. 2 would be to use a scheduling software. It'll make your life a hell of a lot easier, and you have much more data at your hands than if you're all doing this all in Excel in 30 different platforms, and you're trying to kind of make inferences from a number of different places. Number 3 is modify your off-season hours and optimize for efficiency.